Hello Year 11. This presentation is going to take you through the Paper 1 Section 1 that is part of your HSC examination. Okay, so I'm going to take you through an example of the practice paper, and this is where it's helpful for you to have that practice paper in front of you. Now I've taken most of the text from a past paper, and I've changed some, and I've changed the questions to make them more appropriate for you. Each question and how you can unpack the question and understand what sort of answer to give. So here we have question 1, and as you can see, we first look at, question 1 has 3 marks. And the key word that the question is using is explain. So let's have a look at the question. Explain how the image represents ideas about human nature. So when we see the word explain, we know that this question is asking you to not only explain or talk about the what or the how, but also the why. So in order to do this well, it's important to think about the question and brainstorm your ideas. So firstly, start with what is being said. So what is being said? What is the image here saying about human nature? So this is where you get your pen out in the exam or your highlighter and you try and think about what you can see as the ideas in the text. So you can think about, okay, so there is lots of things happening in this text. Firstly, you can see here, all right, there's a whole lot of boys that are all the same in this text, and you can see that we get they're all in the forefront here, and then you realize that as you go further back, they continue all the way through to the horizon. I can see that there are men up here. I can see that there are heads popping out. I can see that there is a lawnmower being used by a man that is just about to mow over this little guy's head here. And that's a little, I think we should all feel a little disturbed by that. So that's my first thought, is this: here we have boys and here we have men. We have new form of technology. So we have another idea about technology. And we have an older representation of technology with the lawnmower. And then I start to break down what else is the image doing. So essentially, I would see that this text is called The Perfect Garden. So it's showing me ideas about boys and men. It's showing me ideas about technology. It's showing me ideas about, well, the men are working and the boys are not. They're on their phones. But I can see that the boys are in focus and we are seeing their faces, they're at detail. The men, they're either in the background and not seen, or the tops of their heads are chopped off and we can't see them. So now that I've broken up the image a little bit and I've just paid attention to what I'm seeing, then we need to think about, well, what are these aspects suggesting about human nature. So what ideas could it be telling me about us as humans? And so this is a good opportunity for you to write down your ideas yourself. By having the boys or the same boy repeated, the image is repeated all the way through, is it demonstrating an idea about the conformity? Is it trying to say something about that? Is it also demonstrating an idea about individuality? What happens to those boys that stick their heads up out of the crowd? Is it saying something about technology? Is it saying something about power? Who has the power in this image here? Is it saying something about there being a tension between power and subservience? Is it saying something about how our humanity can be reduced because of technology? Maybe it's saying something to you about control. So you can see that there are lots of different ideas and you don't all have to have the same one. But what you do have to do is to have a really confident idea and to be able to articulate how that idea has been represented. So when I see this image, I feel like these boys up here, because of their gaze, because of how their eyes are looking out, can you see how their eyes, their gaze is looking out? So that makes me think that maybe they are curious, maybe they are risk takers. Don't want to get all MYP learner profile on you, but maybe they are seeking something. So with their gaze, are they seeking? And what happens to those people who are active and who look out and desire something more? We can see that, interestingly, that the adults, the male figures in here, seem to be preventing that action. They seem to be quite happy to create this perfect garden, this illusion of compliance by encouraging those boys to be on their devices, to be looking down on their phones. Everyone's happy because it keeps everything nice. As soon as there are heads sticking up, you can see that it's no longer nice. It doesn't look perfect anymore. So the boys in the front represent a passivity. They are all alone. It's all internal. The boys who are sticking their heads out are seeking something. They are active. They are curious. So these would be the ideas that I have. These are the what that I would try to draw out in my thinking. So before I answer this question, I need to think about, well, what is this image saying about human nature? Before I can explain how the image represents the ideas, I need to actually know what ideas are in this text first. Then I look at how. How is this image showing me these ideas? So I would then think about my visual techniques, I would think about colour. I would say that the sepia colouring suggests sameness, suggests conformity, can also suggest that it's fairly dull. I'd also see that it creates a contrast between the phone and the boy at the front. I can also see that there is symbolism of uniformity. The body language all looks very defeatist. I can see that in the foreground and the background. So through the foreground, creating a foreground and a background, there are two things going on. So I might talk about that through the use of the foreground of the boys being at the front and the background of the men or the adults being at the back. We're seeing a divide. We're seeing a contrast. I would see a salient image. The salient image I would suggest is the lawnmower. What do our eyes go to when we first see this image? I suggest that it's a lawnmower because of the contrast between the lighter background and the darker lawnmower. My eyes go directly to the lawnmower, not just because of the way colour is used, but also because I see there are lines created through the way that the text is positioned. The text has positioned the figures. There are these subtle diagonals that draw my eye from the bottom to there, and because of the contrast in colour, my eyes travel up to the lawnmower and I pay attention to that, and then also my eyes travel back down to the boys. So you might want to talk about the salient, the lawnmower as being something important. Why are our eyes drawn to the lawnmower? What is the visual text seeking to suggest through emphasizing the lawnmower? You might want to talk about the details versus the shadows. If you want to sound a bit more fancy, you can talk about the depth of field, what's in focus and what's not. You can also talk about the style. So sometimes when we look at text, there's a very particular style. We can see here that this, because of the colouring of the sepia and also the grainy quality of the text, there's a particular style, and maybe the style is emphasizing age, lack of clarity as well, and it creates a contrast between the modern technology here. Even just the boys in t-shirts and the men in work clothes. What is it implying about young boys who are disengaging in the adult world and the men who are out working? So when you brainstorm your ideas, you then go through and think about what visual features you can find, and then you try to make a connection between the two. So when you answer the question, you want to say that you start with your ideas about the human nature such as this. It's being demonstrated through the feature of, and this feature is, and so you make sure that you are using your IQVA scaffold to answer that question. Okay, I'm sorry that took a little bit long to go through, but I think it's worthwhile that we take the time to unpack how to answer that question effectively. Okay, let's look at question 2, the door. How does this poem reveal barriers or opportunities? Okay, so we can see that it's a 3-mark question. So we need to make sure that we're going to do a really good job of explaining how. Let's look at this poem, The Door. Go and open the door. Maybe outside there's a tree or a wood, a garden or a magic city. Go and open the door. Maybe a dog's rummaging. Maybe you'll see a face or an eye or the picture of a picture. Go and open the door. If there's a fog, it will clear. Go and open the door. Even if there's only the darkness ticking, even if there's only the hollow wind, even if nothing is there, go and open the door. At least there'll be a draft. Okay, so when we look at these poems in your exam, you need to make sure that you are looking at the poetic techniques. Okay, so I know that you guys aren't huge fans of poetry, but you need to embrace it, and you need to tackle this with a real positive attitude of, I'm not very good at this, I'm not very confident, but I'm going to get better and I'm going to take this on, because it's really not that hard. So this question where it says how does, it's asking you to analyze. So when we analyze, we are looking at all the different parts and the features. So we know that we need to draw on our knowledge of poetic techniques. In poetry, that means that you want to pay attention to sound, image, and structure. Okay, so just keep those in your head. Sound, image, and structure. And then I want you to come to a conclusion about its overall purpose and meaning once you've thought about those things. So think about what barriers or opportunities are in this poem. When we study poetry, we always pay attention to the title first, The Door. So I know that doors are symbolic. Doors are frequently used to symbolize ideas of opportunities, and they are often used to symbolize barriers, particularly if they are locked. But I suggest that this poem is more emphasizing that doors are there as opportunities. Go and open the door. Go and open the door. Go and open the door. Are you noticing any kind of repetition? So we can see that there is repetition. And when someone repeats something, they're showing you that this is important. When you see a sentence that starts with a verb, you know that it is commanding you, it's instructing you, it's telling you to do something. It is in the imperative mood. You then have a contrast between that high modality word choice, go and open, do this, to maybe, if. So you can see that there is a contrast between certain words like go and open and uncertain, maybe, if. So by having that contrast, you can see that there's real emphasis on the action. It's telling you that the action is what's important. Open the door. That's what's important. Take the opportunities. See the door as an opportunity, not as a barrier. It doesn't matter what's behind the door. Just open it. Take the opportunity to discover something. Take the opportunity to see what opportunities lay. Don't live in fear. Don't stand at that door and wonder what if. Just do it. That's essentially what this poem is saying. So you might want to look for other techniques that the poem is using. You might want to identify the varying lengths of the stanzas. You might want to identify something about the punctuation. You can see that the stanzas and the punctuation do have a big impact on the flow and the rhythm of the poem. You might want to pay attention or identify the play on words, the humour that is used, or metaphors, and the ending here. So there's a whole variety of techniques you can find to demonstrate that this poem is seeking to reveal something to us, to highlight to us something about opportunities. So how is the poem reveal ideas about opportunities? So again, identify technique, quote it, say what it's doing with the verb, and then analyze the purpose and the effect. So remember, what? Okay, question 3. Again, 3 marks. So with this poem, you need to explain how. Okay, again, explain how. You need to be able to say the what and the how and the why. Explain how the poet conveys the effect of technology on relationships. So that's the question. So let's look at the poem and see what you can identify here. Other sun. Who are you now all of a sudden? Blood-bound, but not around. When did you drift into this other land where I'm locked out and you're locked in, headphones dangling, iPodded, in a secret world where the blood thuds, beats, repeats, umbilically fed, unread, you locked in, me locked out, or cyberspaced, unfaced, mobile linked, in sync, text dead, silences, sliced, diced, sent, master linguist in the other world, monosyllabic, minimalist in mine, so it goes with me, locked out, and you locked in. Kiss, kiss. Okay, a very different style of poem. What did you notice with this poem? You can see that there's obviously a relationship here that it sounds like, obviously, I would say, between a parent and a child. So when we think about the what, we see that there are ideas about the relationship between a parent and a child, and we see that in the title, Other Sun. So in this poem, it's exploring a parent contemplating their child and starting with that opening line, who are you now all of a sudden? Okay, this being confronted with this change. And we can see that through those references, that repetition of technology, headphones, iPod, the beats referring to music, cyberspaced, mobile, sync, text, and the repetition of being locked as well can also refer to technology. So we can see that there are ideas of technology being explored here. And through the representing the parental voice, where it's spoken from the perspective of the parent through the personal pronouns I, we are in the head of that speaker. And we are positioned to view the child from the parent's perspective. So looking at this poem, you can write down some ideas about what you think the effect on the relationships, what is the parent suggesting, and the best place to go is where we see that repetition of being locked out, locked in, and then repeated again at the end. Or even things like dead silences, monosyllabic, locked in, me locked out. What's the effect of technology on the relationships? Write down some ideas, and then we think about the different features. Where do we see these ideas being represented? We can see that there's a rhetorical question at the beginning. We can see that there are lots of sound devices being used here. So you can identify the alliteration, particularly in blood bound, but not around. So we can also see those contrasts or contradictions. What do they suggest about the child and the technology's effect on the child and therefore on their relationship? The enjambment. So remember, enjambment, if you want to sound Australian, is the lack of punctuation at the end of the lines there. What's the effect? Is it suggesting the ongoing nature of the relationship, you know, with the lack of breaks and pauses at the end of the sentences? What about this symbolism at the bottom there with the two kisses? It's very ironic in a way, because that's how you would, when you're texting someone, that's how you would express that idea. Even just here, the one words in those lines. The metaphor, can you see that metaphor in the poem? The metaphor with that umbilical cord. Okay, what are the ideas that we associate with an umbilical cord, and how is that being used here? Even with the sounds as well, I notice what we call plosives. It's a fancy word to describe the really strong explosive sounds that are made with certain words, certain beginnings of words like blood, thud, beat, and they have a really strong sound. So a lot of those words that start with letters that we use at the beginning, the front of our mouths, they're the really explosive sounds. So think about where there are soft sounds and where there are explosive sounds. Where do we see shifts from nouns to verbs? What about the hyphenated words? So there are a whole lot, even though this poem seems quite simplistic, there's quite a lot of devices that you can identify here. So they're the hows. So we have to make sure that we join the what and the how together in our answer. So again, identify a technique. If it's 3 marks, you should try to identify more than one and give more than one example. Identify technique, quote an example, say what it's doing through the verb, analyze the effect. Okay, question 4. You can see here that it's worth 4 marks now, so there's a little bit more expected of you here. And this question asks you to analyze the ways that Frankl highlights resilience. So the idea that we are looking for, the what, is resilience. So where can we see this idea in the text? And then when we look at the how, you're looking at analyzing how this idea has been created through identifying various language features. So to get the 4 marks, you want to show that you can skillfully analyze the way that Frankl highlights resilience, where you are providing relevant textual evidence. So you want to make sure that you are giving me 3 or more examples. Can you find 3 or more examples of resilience in this text? 3 or more examples of language features that create this idea of resilience. Now, I'm not going to read the whole text now. You have the text, you can read it for yourself, but let's just have a look at the first 2 paragraphs. We stumbled on in the darkness, over big stones and through large puddles, along the one road leading from camp. The accompanying guards kept shouting at us and driving us with the butts of their rifles. Anyone with very sore feet supported himself on his neighbour's arm. Hardly a word was spoken. The icy wind did not encourage talk. Hiding his mouth behind his upturned collar, the man marching next to me whispered suddenly, "If our wives could see us now! I do hope they are better off in their camps and don't know what is happening to us." That brought thoughts of my own wife to mind, and as we stumbled on for miles, slipping on icy spots, supporting each other time and again, dragging one another up and onward, nothing was said, but we both knew each of us was thinking of his wife. Occasionally I looked at the sky, where the stars were fading and the pink light of the morning was beginning to spread behind a dark bank of clouds. But my mind clung to my wife's image, imagining it with an uncanny acuteness. I heard her answering me, saw her smile, her frank and encouraging look. Real or not, her look was then more luminous than the sun which was beginning to rise. Okay, so already you can get a sense of the resilience here because of the way that the writer is demonstrating to us the difficulties, the struggles that he faces. So we are getting an account of extreme hardship. Even though he's facing extreme hardship, we get a sense of friendship. We get a sense of his appreciation for natural beauty and his memory of his wife and his love for her. So even though there are struggles, we are seeing positives in this extract as well. We notice the first person, the singular, and the plural. So, for example, the singular is me and I, my, but then the plural, we, and our, for example. So when we look at those personal pronouns, when we see the inclusive or the plural use, that creates a sense of inclusiveness, and that suggests that they rely on each other, they support each other, and through that relationship that creates resilience. So we see that he's showing us that the suffering is shared. So that could be something that you might want to write about. Maybe you want to talk about the tone. What's the tone of this? Maybe you want to pay attention to the syntax, the punctuation, the use of colons. or his language, his superlatives, or you might want to pay attention to his use of sensory imagery. And remember, this sensory imagery is fantastic in conveying a sense of the experience. There's also some juxtaposition there. We get lots of descriptions of the physical environment, the setting, and then there's also moments where he's quite philosophical, and that we see that the structure starts with the physical and sometimes moves into that philosophical. So for this answer, I want you to have a go at giving me 3 or more examples of where the text is showing us resilience. Okay, question 5, last one. This one is asking you to compare, as with every text in, as with every paper, the last question is always going to get you to link, to connect 2 or more texts. So when you are asked to compare, you're being asked to show how things are similar. You can look at both the similarities and differences between the 2 texts in terms of their structure, their themes, language and techniques, but the stress is on the similarities. So you should mention briefly the differences and give detailed analysis of the similarities, where you demonstrate your knowledge of the ideas, structures and techniques used by the composer. So what I'm asking you to write about is how this text here, the extract from J.K. Rowling's speech, The Fringe Benefits of Failure, I want you to compare this text to text 4 that we just looked at. So I want you to think about how they demonstrate the importance of writing. So both of these texts are using writing as a means to convey their personal experiences and their message. And they both have something really personal to say about life, about being human. So what are they saying to you about being human? And through that, how are they showing you that for them, being able to write and to communicate to us these ideas is really important. So have a go at answering that question. It's just going to be extended response, so I want you to try and give me 5 or more examples, and that's, so because you're talking about 2 texts, you can do 3 examples from each text. Now this is going to be a little harder to do, so see how you go and just have a go at doing it, and that will give you more of an idea of how capable you are and where your strengths and weaknesses are. So if you could, in that file that you've downloaded that has the question, I've given you spaces to write your answers. So have a go at answering these questions and submit them to MySupPause for feedback. Thanks, guys.